Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Sand. Lawrence Merrick never had reason to suspect his marriage was anything but solid. At 43, he had built what he considered an enviable life. Chief Operations Officer at Meridian Technologies, a sprawling colonial in Oak Ridge Heights, and a family that, at least on paper, appeared perfect. His wife Diana had been by his side for 18 years, through the lean years when he was grinding 16-hour days to climb the corporate ladder. Their daughter Brooke, now 17, was heading to college next year on a partial scholarship. What outsiders couldn't see was how the foundations had been crumbling for years. Lawrence was blind to it too, or perhaps willfully ignorant. The weekend trips Diana took to visit her sister in Portland. The way Brooke increasingly kept her distance from him. The hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he entered a room. "Big day tomorrow," Lawrence said, loosening his tie as he entered their bedroom. Diana sat at her vanity, applying night cream in methodical circles. She responded, not looking up. The Richardson account. Board's announcing the new executive leadership team. Lawrence hung his jacket carefully. If things go the way Ted hinted, we'll have reason to celebrate tomorrow night. Diana's eyes met his in the mirror. For a moment, something like guilt flickered across her face. "That's nice," she said. "I'm sure you've earned it." Lawrence hesitated, feeling the distance between them, a chasm that had been widening for months. He remembered when Diana used to get excited about his career milestones, when she'd arrange surprise celebrations and brag about him to her friends. "I made reservations at Lucille," he continued. "Table for 3 at 8. Thought Brooke might want to join us." Diana's hand stilled. "I'll let her know," she said, an odd note in her voice. In his home office, Lawrence reviewed the quarterly projections one last time. The Richardson acquisition had been his baby, 18 months of strategic planning and careful negotiation. His phone buzzed with a text from Ted Blackwell, his mentor and the CEO of Meridian. "Congratulations in advance. You knocked it out of the park." Board vote was unanimous. A warm flush of pride spread through Lawrence. After years of sacrifice, of missed family dinners and working holidays, the payoff was finally here. Executive Vice President. The salary bump alone would add another $200,000 a year, not counting the stock options. He thought of Diana's reaction when he'd paid off the mortgage on her parents' home 4 years ago, taking over the payments when her father's health took a turn. The gratitude in her eyes then almost made up for the growing coldness between them. In Brooke's room, music thumped behind a closed door. Lawrence knocked gently. "What?" came a muffled response. "Can I come in for a sec?" The music lowered, and Brooke opened the door, her expression guarded. Her room was a typical teenager's space. Clothes scattered across the floor, posters of bands Lawrence had never heard of, textbooks abandoned on the desk. "Big meeting tomorrow," Lawrence said, leaning against the doorframe. "I was hoping you'd join your mom and me for dinner tomorrow night. Lucille at 8. Brooke looked down, fidgeting with her phone. "I have plans tomorrow." "This is important, Brooke. Can you reschedule?" She shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "I'll see." Lawrence felt a familiar frustration rising. When had his daughter become this stranger? He remembered coaching her soccer team, the weekend spent teaching her to ride a bike, the bedtime stories. Now she could barely look at him. "Your mother will text you the details," he said finally, retreating. That night, Lawrence lay awake beside Diana, listening to her measured breathing. Something felt off, but he couldn't, or wouldn't, pinpoint what. Tomorrow would change everything, he told himself. Success had a way of fixing problems. Money had a way of papering over cracks. He didn't notice Diana checking her phone in the darkness, or the smile that played across her lips at the message she received. Chapter 2. The Ascent. The boardroom erupted in applause as Ted concluded his announcement. Lawrence stood, accepting handshakes and backslaps from his colleagues. The promotion to Executive Vice President of Operations was official along with a corner office and direct reporting line to the CEO. Speech, someone called out. Lawrence cleared his throat, surveying the faces around him. Some genuinely happy for him, others masking envy beneath professional smiles. I couldn't have done this without every person in this room, he began. Especially Ted, who took a chance on me when I was just a project manager with big ideas. Ted raised his coffee mug in salute. And of course, my family, Lawrence continued. My wife Diana has been my rock for 18 years, through all the late nights and missed weekends. My daughter Brooke, who's put up with a dad who was sometimes more present on Zoom calls than at her school events. A few knowing chuckles rippled through the room. After the meeting, Lawrence retreated to his office to find it already being packed up for the move to the executive floor. His assistant Gina had arranged for a bottle of champagne and a card signed by his team. Congratulations, Mr. Merrick, she said, beaming. The movers will have everything in your new office by morning. Thanks, Gina. And please, after 5 years, you can call me Lawrence. Old habits, she smiled. Oh, and your wife called while you were in the meeting. She asked if dinner could be moved to 7 instead of 8. Lawrence frowned. Did she say why? No, just that 7 would work better for their schedule. Their schedule. The wording struck him as odd, but he dismissed it. Call Lucille and change the reservation, he said, and let Diana know it's confirmed. Throughout the afternoon, Lawrence received a steady stream of congratulatory messages. College friends, industry colleagues, his brother in Seattle, but nothing from Diana or Brooke. He sent Diana a text. Big news official. Can't wait to celebrate tonight. Love you. The response took nearly an hour. Great. See you at Lucille. No congratulations. No expression of pride. Just confirmation. At 6:30, Lawrence arrived at Lucille, a glass-walled restaurant perched on the 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower with panoramic views of the city. The maitre d' escorted him to a corner table set for 3. Your guests haven't arrived yet, Mr. Merrick. Would you care for a drink while waiting? Lawrence ordered a scotch, neat, and checked his phone. No messages. 6:45 came and went. Then 7 o'clock. He sent a text to Diana. At the restaurant. Everything okay? The minutes ticked by. Lawrence nursed his scotch, making awkward small talk with the hovering server. At 7:30, his phone buzzed. Diana's face appeared on the screen. You're not exactly a priority right now. Order without us. The message hit him like a physical blow. Lawrence signaled the waiter. Could I see the wine list again? He ordered the most expensive bottle on the menu, a $640 at Chateau Margaux, and a porterhouse for one. If he was going to celebrate alone, he'd do it properly. As he waited for his meal, Lawrence scrolled through his social media feeds, something he rarely did. And there it was, posted just 2 minutes ago. Brooke's Instagram account, one he barely checked since she rarely accepted his follow requests, had a new post. A photo of Diana, Brooke, and a man Lawrence recognized with a sickening jolt. Rick Stanford, Diana's college boyfriend before Lawrence. The man she'd nearly married before Lawrence entered the picture. The caption knocked the air from his lungs. Family night out for the real success story. Congrats on the new boat, Uncle Rick. Hashtag family first, hashtag celebration vibes. The photo showed them at Marina Bay, champagne flutes raised beside a gleaming new boat, sunset casting them in golden light. Diana was wearing the dress she'd bought last week. The one she'd told Lawrence was for their dinner tonight. His steak arrived, but Lawrence had lost his appetite. He drained his wine glass, then refilled it to the brim. The waiter hovered nearby, sensing the shift in mood. Is everything all right with your meal, sir? Bring me the check, Lawrence said quietly. And a pen. When the bill arrived, $1, $7.40 including the bottle of wine he'd barely touched. Lawrence signed it with a generous tip. As he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, his phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Hey Lawrence, Rick here. Diana told me about your promotion. Congratulations, man. No hard feelings about tonight. The boat was a surprise for everyone. We should catch up sometime. Lawrence stared at the message, a cold rage building inside him. No hard feelings? The casual presumption that they were on speaking terms? That this was a simple scheduling conflict rather than a deliberate humiliation? He got into his car, but didn't start it immediately. Instead, he opened his banking app and navigated to the mortgage account for Diana's parents' home, the one he'd been paying faithfully for 4 years since her father's stroke. The monthly payment of $3,200 was scheduled for tomorrow. His finger hovered over the cancel recurring payment button. Not yet, he thought. First, he needed answers. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The house was dark when Lawrence pulled into the driveway at 10:30 p.m. Diana's car was still gone. He unlocked the door, dropping his keys with deliberate noise on the marble entry table. The silence of the house mocked him. In his home office, Lawrence opened his laptop and began to dig. Years of handling corporate intelligence had taught him how to find information. He started with the basics: bank statements, credit card transactions, phone records. The picture that emerged made his stomach churn. Weekly cash withdrawals from Diana's personal account. Money he'd never questioned because they maintained separate accounts alongside their joint finances. Calls to the same number dozens of times a month, going back over 2 years. A credit card statement showing purchases at jewelry stores and high-end restaurants on days Diana claimed to be visiting her sister. Lawrence poured himself a whiskey from the decanter on his desk, mind racing. How long had Rick Stanford been back in the picture? When had his family begun their betrayal? He accessed Diana's email using the password she didn't know he had, her mother's maiden name and birth year, unchanged for a decade. There they were, hundreds of messages between Diana and Rick dating back 3 years. The earliest ones were innocent enough, reconnecting after running into each other at a college alumni event, then growing increasingly intimate, planning meetups, discussing Lawrence's long hours and business trips as opportunities. And Brooke had known for at least 2 years, based on the emails, had been brought into their confidence, turned against her own father. He's always been more of a provider than a dad, Diana had written in one message. Brooke barely knows him. He's just a guy who pays for everything. The words burned like acid. Lawrence had sacrificed everything to provide for them, to give them security and comfort. And this was how they repaid him. At midnight, headlights swept across the front windows. Lawrence remained in his office, listening as Diana entered the house. Her heels clicked on the hardwood, then stopped. She noticed his keys, realized he was home. "Lawrence!" Her voice carried down the hallway. He didn't answer. After a moment, her footsteps continued upstairs. Lawrence waited until he heard the shower running, then followed. In their bedroom, Diana's phone lay on the dresser. He picked it up, unlocked, another careless mistake on her part. The message thread with Rick was open. "Did you tell him yet?" Rick had texted at 9:15 p.m. "Not yet. Waiting for the right moment. He'll be devastated. It's been 3 years, D. Time to rip off the Band-Aid." "I know." After his big promotion, dinner seemed cruel. "Would do it tomorrow." Lawrence took screenshots, sending them to his own phone. Then he continued scrolling, finding earlier messages about Rick's new boat, a $175,000 purchase financed by the dealership where he worked as sales manager. A boat Rick apparently couldn't afford on his own, based on Diana's text promising to help with the payments once things were settled. The shower shut off. Lawrence returned to his office, locking the door behind him. His mind was surprisingly clear now, the initial shock crystallizing into icy determination. Opening his laptop again, he began to make plans. First, he transferred $500,000 from their joint savings account to his personal account, money earned from his bonuses over the years, which he had deposited for their retirement. Next, he drafted emails to their family attorney and financial advisor, requesting urgent appointments for the next day. At 2 a.m., Lawrence heard Diana try the office door, finding it locked. "Lawrence? Are you in there? We need to talk." He remained silent, continuing his methodical work. Diana eventually gave up, returning upstairs. By morning, Lawrence had pieced together the full extent of the betrayal. Rick Stanford had re-entered their lives 3 years ago, cultivating a relationship with both Diana and Brooke. The visits to her sister were weekends with Rick. The emotional distance was deliberate, preparing for the eventual split. His daughter had been turned against him, fed a narrative of an absent father too consumed with work to care about his family. As dawn broke, Lawrence completed the final transfers and arrangements. He canceled the recurring mortgage payment on Diana's parents' home. He contacted HR to change the beneficiaries on his life insurance and retirement accounts. He drafted a note, printed it, and sealed it in an envelope. When he finally emerged from his office, Diana was in the kitchen making coffee, still in her robe. She jumped slightly at his appearance, eyes red-rimmed, stubble darkening his jaw, still wearing yesterday's suit. "Lawrence, we need to talk," she began, her voice gentle in the way one speaks to a terminally ill patient. "No, we don't," he replied coldly. "I'm late for work. Please, just listen. Did you and Brooke enjoy your evening with Rick? Celebrating his new boat, while I sat alone at Lucille." Diana paled. "You saw her post." "I saw everything, Diana. 3 years of messages. Plans to leave me. Turning my daughter against me while I paid for her college fund. Spending my money on your lover's boat." "It's not like that," she protested. "Rick and I reconnected, yes, but—" "Save it," Lawrence interrupted. "I'll be staying at the Westin downtown for the foreseeable future. My attorney will contact you." "Lawrence, please." But he was already walking out the door, envelope in hand. At the end of the driveway, he stopped at the community mailbox, retrieving the day's mail. Among the envelopes was the monthly statement for the mortgage on Diana's parents' home. Lawrence drove to their house, a modest bungalow in the suburbs, and placed both the statement and his sealed note in their mailbox. The note read, "I've been covering your mortgage for 4 years. The payments are now canceled. Ask Rick Stanford to pay it. He seems to be the new man of the family. Lawrence." Then he drove to work, ready to begin his first day as executive vice president, and the first day of his meticulously planned revenge. Chapter 4: The Counterattack. By 9 a.m., Lawrence had settled into his new corner office, the nameplate already updated to reflect his promotion. He appeared remarkably composed for a man whose personal life had imploded overnight. His assistant Gina brought in his schedule and a coffee. "You look like you could use something stronger than coffee," she observed. "Rough night. You could say that. I'll need to make some changes to my calendar. Clear my lunch hour for a meeting with Philip Morton at Blake & Associates." Morton was his personal attorney, separate from the firm Meridian used. "Of course. Anything else?" "Yes. If my wife calls, I'm in meetings all day. And I'll need a hotel recommendation for an extended stay." Gina raised an eyebrow, but maintained her professional demeanor. "I'll take care of it right away." As she turned to leave, Lawrence added, "One more thing. Could you ask Ted if he's free for dinner tonight? Tell him it's important." With his immediate arrangements handled, Lawrence turned to his computer. First, he changed all his passwords, email, banking, investment accounts, everything Diana might have access to. Then he began documenting the financial evidence of Diana's betrayal, creating a comprehensive file for his attorney. At 10:30, his phone buzzed. Diana had tried calling 6 times already. This time it was a text. "Your in-laws just called, furious. What have you done?" Lawrence ignored it, focusing instead on the email that had just arrived from Meridian's finance department, confirming his new compensation package. The base salary increase was substantial, but the real value lay in the stock options, potentially worth millions if the company continued its upward trajectory. His phone buzzed again. "Diana's father, Frank. How dare you use our home as leverage? This is beneath you, Lawrence." Lawrence allowed himself a small, cold smile. The first shot in his counteroffensive had landed. Diana's parents had always treated him as somehow unworthy of their daughter, despite his financial support. Let them feel the precariousness of their situation now. At noon, Lawrence met with Philip Morton in a private dining room at the Capitol Grill, a short walk from Meridian's offices. "You look like hell," Morton observed, passing him a folder of documents. "But your timing is impeccable. With this promotion, your financial position for the divorce is much stronger." "I don't want a settlement," Lawrence said, flipping through the papers. "I want to ensure she gets nothing beyond what the law absolutely requires." Morton leaned forward. "Lawrence, I've known you for 15 years. This scorched earth approach isn't you." "It is now." Lawrence's voice was flat. "She and her lover have been planning this for years. My daughter is involved. I want everything documented, every advantage pressed." Morton sighed. "As your attorney, I'll execute your wishes. As your friend, I'm concerned. I appreciate the concern. Now, what's my next step?" Immediate financial segregation. Change the locks on the house. Legally, it's complicated, but it creates leverage. Document everything, especially regarding your daughter's involvement, for custody negotiations. Lawrence shook his head. Brooke turns 18 in 4 months. Custody is irrelevant. Then it's primarily about asset protection. The mortgage payments you've been making on our parents' home, that's negotiating leverage. We can argue those were gifts to your wife's family, not marital assets to be divided. As they finished lunch, Lawrence received another text from Diana. 61 missed calls from my parents. My mother is hysterical. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. How could you do this to them? Lawrence showed Morton the message. Perfect, the attorney said. She's admitting the financial dependency. Don't respond. Back at his office, Lawrence found an email from Rick Stanford. The subject line read, "Let's talk like adults. Lawrence, Diana told me about your reaction. I understand you're hurt, but pulling financial support from her elderly parents is low. This isn't about them. Be angry with us, not innocent bystanders. I've always respected you as the man Diana chose. I hope we can resolve this without collateral damage. Rick." The presumption of the email, the casual tone, the implied moral high ground, ignited Lawrence's rage anew. He drafted a reply, then deleted it without sending. Rick wanted a reaction. He wouldn't get one. Not yet. At 6 p.m., Lawrence met Ted Blackwell at Winston Steakhouse, another of the city's high-end establishments. "Quite a day for you," Ted said, raising his martini and toast. "First day as EVP, and now I hear rumors of personal drama." Lawrence had known Ted for over a decade. The older man had been his mentor, champion, and occasionally his confidant. "Diana's leaving me," Lawrence said simply. "For her ex-boyfriend. They've been seeing each other for 3 years. Ted winced. "Christ, Lawrence. I'm sorry. It gets better. My daughter isn't on it. They were celebrating his new boat purchase last night while I sat alone at my promotion dinner." Ted seemed at a loss. "That's cruel. I need a favor," Lawrence said, cutting to the chase. "The executive housing allowance. Is it available immediately?" Ted nodded. "Of course. I'll have HR expedite it. And Lawrence, take whatever time you need." "I don't need time," Lawrence replied. "I need to work. The more, the better." "Understood. Actually, there is the Singapore expansion. We need someone on site for a few weeks to oversee the transition. It would mean leaving immediately this weekend." Lawrence considered this. 3 weeks abroad would give him distance, time for his legal moves to take effect without daily confrontations. "I'll do it," he said. "Have travel arrange everything." That night, in his hotel suite, Lawrence received a call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Dad." It was Brooke's voice, small and uncertain. Something twisted painfully in his chest. "What do you want, Brooke?" "Mom told me what you did. Grandpa and Grandma could lose their house." "How could you?" "How could I?" Lawrence's voice rose despite his efforts to control it. "How could you? My own daughter conspiring behind my back? Celebrating with your mother's lover while I sat alone at what should have been a family dinner. You were never there for us." Brooke shot back, her voice breaking. "Always working, always at the office. Uncle Rick actually showed up. He came to my debate competitions, my soccer games. Where were you?" The accusation struck deep, partly because Lawrence recognized the kernel of truth in it. There had been missed events, abbreviated weekends, work calls that interrupted family time. But never from lack of caring. Always from his drive to provide, to secure their future. "Uncle Rick," Lawrence repeated, the term like poison on his tongue. "He's not your uncle. He's the man your mother has been cheating with for 3 years. While I paid for your private school, your college fund, your grandparents' mortgage. It's always about money with you." Brooke was crying now. "That's all you care about." "No, Brooke. I cared about our family. You and your mother were the ones who decided I wasn't worthy of basic respect or honesty." He ended the call, hands shaking. Part of him wanted to reach out to try to make his daughter understand. But the larger part, the wounded, betrayed part, couldn't forgive her participation in his humiliation. Lawrence opened his laptop and sent 2 emails. The first was to his bank, confirming the stop payment on Diana's parents' mortgage. The second was to his attorney, attaching screenshots of his conversation with Brooke as evidence of parental alienation. Then he booked a one-way ticket to Singapore, departing in 48 hours. Chapter 5. The Execution. Singapore greeted Lawrence with suffocating humidity and the sterile efficiency of a city-state built on corporate ambition. It suited his mood perfectly. For 3 weeks, he immersed himself in establishing Meridian's Asia-Pacific headquarters, working 18-hour days and collapsing into dreamless sleep in his luxury hotel suite. The distance gave him clarity. Each day, he received updates from Morton about the divorce proceedings. Diana had hired Richard Balling, a renowned divorce attorney known for securing generous settlements for wronged spouses. Their initial demand was predictably excessive: half of Lawrence's accumulated wealth, ongoing alimony of $12,000 monthly, and continued mortgage payments for her parents. They're overreaching, Morton assured him during their daily video calls. Standard opening gambit. But I'm concerned about some of your financial moves immediately after discovery. The judge might view them as attempts to hide assets. I'm not hiding anything, Lawrence replied. I'm protecting what's mine from people who betrayed me. While in Singapore, Lawrence maintained radio silence with Diana and Brooke. He ignored the increasingly desperate messages from Diana's parents about their mortgage situation. His only personal communications were with Ted Blackwell, who kept him updated on company matters, and Gina, who manages affairs back home. 3 days before his scheduled return, Lawrence received an unexpected email from Rick Stanford. Lawrence, this has gone far enough. Diana's parents are facing foreclosure notices. Is that really what you want? To punish innocent elderly people? I'm prepared to take over the mortgage payments, but the bank won't work with me without your cooperation. Let's resolve this like reasonable men. Rick? Lawrence forwarded the email to Morton with a single instruction: use this as leverage. The next day, Morton called with news. They've revised their settlement offer significantly. No alimony, just asset division. And they're willing to include a non-disclosure agreement. No public statements about the circumstances of your separation. What changed? Lawrence asked, though he suspected he knew. Rick Stanford's financial situation is more precarious than it appeared. The boat purchase stretched him thin. He can't cover the mortgage on her parents' home without liquidating investments at a loss. Interesting, Lawrence said. Counter with this. I'll resume the mortgage payments temporarily if Diana signs over her interest in our vacation property in Lake Tahoe. Full ownership to me, plus she forfeits any claim to my Meridian stock options. That's aggressive, Morton hedged. The Tahoe property alone is worth over $1 million. And I paid for it, Lawrence said flatly. Every penny. It was my bonus that covered the down payment, my salary that paid the mortgage. Diana hasn't worked since Brooke was born. I'll present it. Morton agreed reluctantly. On the eve of his departure from Singapore, Lawrence received confirmation. Diana had accepted his terms. The Lake Tahoe property would be his exclusively, along with his stock options and retirement accounts. In exchange, he would temporarily resume mortgage payments on her parents' home, with the stipulation that they would cease permanently once the divorce was finalized. One more thing, Lawrence told Morton during their final call from Singapore. I want a forensic accounting of all withdrawals Diana made from our joint accounts over the past 3 years. Every dollar she spent on Rick Stanford, I want documented and deducted from her settlement. Morton sighed. At some point, this crosses from protecting your interests to punitive action. That's precisely the point, Lawrence replied. They should understand there's a price for betrayal. Lawrence returned to a city in the grip of early autumn, leaves beginning to turn along the boulevards leading from the airport to downtown. He had arranged for a corporate apartment, a sleek, minimalist 2-bedroom with views of the financial district where Meridian's headquarters dominated the skyline. His first meeting upon return was with Ted Blackwell, who had been running interference with colleagues curious about Lawrence's abrupt departure and the rumors of his marital troubles. Singapore was impressed, Ted said, settling into one of the leather chairs in Lawrence's office. The team you assembled is top-notch. Board's talking about making you point person on all international expansions. I'd welcome the challenge, Lawrence said. And the travel. Ted studied him carefully. How are you really doing? I'm focused on work, Lawrence deflected. The personal situation is proceeding as expected. Diana called the office twice while you were gone, Ted said carefully. Seemed quite distraught. Lawrence's expression hardened. That won't happen again. The settlement negotiations are almost complete. Good, good. Ted nodded, clearly uncomfortable. And your daughter? Brooke, right? A shadow crossed Lawrence's face. She made her choice. Ted cleared his throat. Listen, Lawrence, I've been divorced twice. It's hell, especially when kids are involved. If you need to talk. Thank you. Lawrence cut him off, but I'm handling it. That evening, Lawrence visited the house for the first time since the night of his discovery. He had arranged with Morton to collect personal items while Diana was at her weekly therapy appointment. Another detail he'd uncovered in his investigation, sessions she'd been attending for over a year, presumably to deal with the guilt of her affair. The house felt like a museum of someone else's life. Family photos on the walls, furniture he'd paid for but never had time to enjoy, the trappings of a successful family man. Lawrence moved efficiently through the rooms, filling boxes with only what mattered. His grandfather's watch, case files from significant career milestones, the few genuine personal mementos not tainted by association with Diana or Brooke. In Brooke's room, he paused. On her desk sat a framed photo he'd never seen before, Brooke flanked by Diana and Rick at what appeared to be a college campus tour. All three smiling broadly. A perfect family unit with no space for Lawrence. The betrayal felt fresh again, a knife twisting in an unhealed wound. He left the photo untouched, but opened Brooke's desk drawer. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the one he'd given her for her 16th birthday, monogrammed with her initials. He flipped it open, knowing it was an invasion of privacy, but beyond caring. The entries confirmed everything. Page after page detailed Brooke's growing relationship with Rick, who had positioned himself as the understanding father figure, the man who actually had time for her. Diana was described as finally happy and living authentically. Lawrence appeared mainly as an ATM, the distant provider whose absence was noted only when it inconvenienced them. One entry from 6 months ago struck particularly deep. Mom says once everything is settled with the divorce, Rick will probably officially adopt me. I haven't used Dad's last name on anything except legal documents for months anyway. Rick says he'd be honored to have me as a daughter. Lawrence replaced the journal, a cold certainty settling over him. This wasn't just about Diana's betrayal anymore. This was about the systematic erasure of his role in his own family, a coordinated effort to replace him while continuing to exploit his financial support. As he loaded the last box into his car, a familiar vehicle turned into the driveway. Diana's Audi, returning earlier than expected. Lawrence considered leaving immediately, but decided against it. This confrontation was inevitable. Diana emerged from the car, stopping short when she saw him. She looked thinner than he remembered, dark circles under her eyes. "Lawrence," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Morton said you'd be coming for your things." "Just finished," he replied coldly. "We need to talk about Brooke," Diana said, taking a step toward him. "She's devastated by all this. She won't even speak to her grandparents because of the mortgage situation." Interesting priorities, Lawrence noted. Not devastated by betraying her father, just by the consequences. She's a child, Lawrence. She's 17, Diana. Old enough to understand loyalty. Old enough to know that celebrating with her mother's lover while her father sits alone at a restaurant is cruel. Diana's composure cracked. "What do you want from us? Blood? You've taken a house in Tahoe, your precious stock options, frozen accounts Brooke, and I need for basic expenses. I've paid every household bill," Lawrence interrupted. "I've maintained Brooke's college fund. I've even temporarily resumed payments on your parents' mortgage, despite having no obligation to support them. What exactly are you lacking, Diana?" "Dignity," she snapped. "You're punishing us financially because your pride is hurt." Lawrence laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "My pride? You and Rick and our daughter, yes, our daughter, the one he's planning to adopt, conspired for years behind my back. You used me for financial support while building a life that excluded me. And you talk about dignity?" Diana paled. "How do you know about the adoption discussion?" It doesn't matter. What matters is that it stops now. Brooke can change her name after she turns 18 if she wants, but there will be no adoption while she's a minor. And if you or Rick attempt it, every financial accommodation I've made ends immediately. You can't control everything with money, Lawrence, Diana said, tears forming in her eyes. That's why I left. Everything was always a transaction with you. No, Diana. A transaction implies both parties receive something of value. All I got was betrayal. He got into his car and drove away, leaving Diana standing in the driveway of the home he still technically owned, but would never call his again. Chapter 6. The Calculation. 1 month after his return from Singapore, Lawrence sat in Morton's office reviewing the final divorce settlement. The terms were favorable beyond what most wronged spouses could expect. Lawrence retained a primary residence, which he planned to sell, the Lake Tahoe property, his full retirement accounts, and all Meridian stock options. Diana received a cash settlement equivalent to approximately 20% of their marital assets, plus the vacation timeshare in Florida that Lawrence had never particularly enjoyed. Most importantly, the settlement included ironclad confidentiality provisions and penalties for disparagement. Neither party could publicly discuss the reasons for their divorce, a condition Lawrence had insisted upon to protect his professional reputation. She's agreed to everything, Morton said, sliding the document across his desk. Frankly, I'm surprised. Balling usually fights harder. He fought, Lawrence replied, skimming the pages. I just had more leverage. About that leverage, Morton hesitated. The forensic accounting revealed something interesting about Rick Stanford's boat purchase. Lawrence looked up. I'm listening. The down payment, $35,000, came from a joint account Diana opened with Brooke last year. An account funded primarily by the emergency cash you've been giving Brooke monthly since she started driving. The revelation should have angered Lawrence, but he felt oddly detached. Of course, they had used his money to finance Rick's toys. The pattern was consistent. Does Diana know you discovered this? No, Morton confirmed. It wasn't directly relevant to the settlement calculations. Lawrence nodded slowly. Keep it that way. I may need it later. Outside Morton's office, Lawrence checked his phone to find 3 missed calls from Ted Blackwell. He returned the call immediately. Lawrence, good, Ted answered. Can you come to the office? Something's come up with the Singapore project. Within the hour, Lawrence was seated in Meridian's executive conference room with Ted and 2 board members he didn't know well. The atmosphere was tense. We've received concerning information, Ted began, uncharacteristically formal, about your activities during the Singapore assignment. Lawrence kept his expression neutral. What kind of information? Allegations that you used company resources for personal activities. Specifically, that you directed the legal team in Singapore to investigate a Rick Stanford, who has no connection to Meridian's business interests. Lawrence felt a cold prickle along his spine. He had indeed asked Meridian's Singapore legal department to run a background check on Rick, curious about his financial situation. It had seemed a minor request at the time, a small use of company resources during his management of a major project. I can explain, Lawrence began, but Ted raised a hand. Before you do, you should know this complaint came from Stanford himself. He apparently has a friend who works for a Singapore contractor. We learned about the inquiry. He contacted our ethics hotline. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Rick had used Lawrence's own company against him, potentially undermining his new executive position. A petty revenge for the financial pressure Lawrence had applied. It was a momentary lapse in judgment, Lawrence admitted. During a personally difficult time, my wife was leaving me for this man, and I wanted to ensure there were no financial entanglements that might affect Meridian if the situation became public. Ted and the board members exchanged glances. That's understandable, one of them said cautiously, but still a misuse of company resources. I accept full responsibility, Lawrence said, and will accept whatever reprimand the board deems appropriate. Ted looked relieved. Given your record and the circumstances, the board is inclined toward leniency. A formal reprimand in your file, reimbursement of the legal department's time, and mandatory ethics refresher training. Thank you, Lawrence said, maintaining his professional demeanor. I appreciate the consideration. After the meeting, Ted pulled Lawrence aside. That was a close one. Stanford clearly wanted to damage your position here. It won't happen again, Lawrence assured him. Good. Because the board signed off on your proposal for the European expansion. You'll be leading it personally. 3 months in London, starting next quarter. The opportunity was exactly what Lawrence needed. Distance, challenging work, and time to execute the next phase of his plan. Rick Stanford's attempted sabotage had backfired, pushing Meridian's leadership to reaffirm their confidence in Lawrence through this prestigious assignment. That evening, Lawrence received a text from Diana. Just sign the final papers. It's really over. Despite everything, I hope you find peace, Lawrence. He didn't respond. Peace wasn't what he sought. Justice was. The following day, Lawrence visited First Capital Bank, where he and Diana had done their personal banking for over a decade. Martin Wells, the branch manager, greeted him warmly. Mr. Merrick, good to see you. Your ex-wife was in yesterday, completing the account separations. That's actually why I'm here, Lawrence said. There's one joint matter still requiring attention. In Martin's office, Lawrence explained his request. The mortgage on Diana's parents' home, while being paid by Lawrence, was legally in both his and Diana's names, a detail he had purposely not addressed in the divorce settlement. I'd like to transfer the mortgage fully to Diana, Lawrence explained. Remove myself completely from the obligation. Martin looked uncomfortable. That would require her to qualify for the loan independently, Mr. Merrick. Based on her financial declaration in your divorce filing, that seems unlikely. I understand, Lawrence said, but I'd like to try anyway. And Martin, I'd appreciate if this conversation remained confidential. Diana should hear about the transfer attempt from the bank, not from me. Of course, Martin agreed. Client confidentiality is paramount. Lawrence knew exactly what would happen. The bank would contact Diana about assuming the mortgage. She would fail to qualify based on her limited income and the substantial existing debt on the property. The bank would then either require her to find a co-signer or face foreclosure proceedings. Rick Stanford, despite his boat purchase and apparent success, was over-leveraged himself. Another detail Lawrence had discovered through his ill-advised background check. He wouldn't qualify as a co-signer. Diana's parents, both retired and living on fixed incomes, certainly couldn't assume the loan. Lawrence had created the perfect trap. Legally, he had fulfilled his settlement obligation by maintaining the mortgage payments through the divorce proceedings. The transfer attempt was entirely legal and would appear to the court as a good-faith effort to disentangle their financial affairs. When Diana and her parents inevitably came begging for help, he would have maximum leverage. 2 days later, Lawrence received a frantic call from Diana. The bank says you're removing yourself from my parents' mortgage. They'll lose their home, Lawrence. I'm simplifying our financial separation, Lawrence replied calmly. The divorce is final. There's no reason for me to remain on a loan for your parents' home. You know, I can't qualify to take it over. Neither can they. That sounds like a problem for you and Rick to solve, Lawrence said. Perhaps he could sell his boat. Diana's voice broke. My father had another stroke last week. The doctor says he can't be moved. This stress could kill him, Lawrence. Is that what you want? For a moment, Lawrence felt a flicker of doubt. Frank and Marion had never been particularly warm to him, but they were elderly people with health problems. Did they deserve to be collateral damage in his war with Diana and Rick? He pushed the thought aside. What I want, he said coldly, is for actions to have consequences. You, Rick, and Brooke made your choices. These are the consequences. What will it take? Diana asked after a long silence. To keep you on the mortgage until we can find another solution? Lawrence had been waiting for this question. A full accounting of every penny of my money that went toward Rick's boat, repaid in full, and a written acknowledgement from Brooke that her Uncle Rick used her college savings fund for his down payment. That's cruel, Lawrence. Using Brooke that way. No crueler than what you did to me, he replied. Those are my terms. Take them or find another way to save your parents' home. He ended the call, knowing his conditions created an impossible situation. Diana couldn't repay the boat money without selling assets she needed for her own financial security. Brooke wouldn't provide the written acknowledgement without revealing her own complicity in misusing funds Lawrence had provided. The trap was complete. Now Lawrence just had to wait for them to struggle until he was ready to deliver his final blow. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 3 months passed. Lawrence's European assignment proved even more successful than the Singapore expansion, cementing his position as Meridian's indispensable international troubleshooter. In London, he found a rhythm that worked for him. Brutal workdays followed by solitary evenings in his company-provided Mayfair apartment, plotting each move in his ongoing chess match against Diana, Rick, and Brooke. The mortgage situation had developed exactly as he'd planned. Diana's parents received a formal foreclosure notice, giving them 90 days to resolve the situation or lose their home. Diana, desperate to find a solution, had been forced to take a job as an administrative assistant at Rick's dealership, a humbling step down for a woman who had spent years as the pampered wife of an executive. Rick, meanwhile, had been forced to sell his precious boat at a substantial loss to cover mounting debts. The forensic accounting Lawrence had commissioned revealed that Rick had been living far beyond his means for years, using Diana's access to Lawrence's money to maintain a facade of success. Most satisfying to Lawrence was Brooke's situation. Upon graduating high school, she had expected to attend Wellerton University, an exclusive private college that had offered her a partial scholarship. Lawrence had been planning to cover the substantial remaining costs, approximately $45,000 per year. Without his support, and with Diana's reduced circumstances, Brooke had been forced to defer her acceptance and enroll in community college instead. Lawrence tracked these developments through calculated sources, occasional updates from neighbors in their old community, Morton's continued monitoring of the legal situation, and a surprisingly helpful Martin Wells at First Capital Bank, who kept Lawrence informed of Diana's increasingly desperate attempts to resolve the mortgage crisis. In early December, Lawrence returned to the States for Meridian's annual board meeting and holiday party. The company had experienced its most profitable year ever, with the international expansions Lawrence had overseen contributing significantly to the bottom line. His bonus would be substantial, over $1.2 million, and rumors circulated that he was being groomed to succeed Ted Blackwell as CEO within the next few years. The night before the board meeting, Lawrence received an unexpected visitor at his downtown apartment. The doorman called up to announce that a Miss Merrick was in the lobby, insisting on seeing him. Lawrence's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won out. Send her up. Brooke looked different than he remembered. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, her fashionable clothes replaced by jeans and a worn sweater. When she stepped into his apartment, he noticed she still wore the watch he'd given her for her 16th birthday. "Dad," she said, the words sounding foreign on her lips after so long. "Brooke," he replied neutrally. "This is unexpected." She glanced around the minimalist apartment, taking in the view of the city skyline, the expensive furniture, the evidence of his continued prosperity while her mother struggled. "I need to talk to you about Grandpa and Grandma's house," she began. "I assumed as much," Lawrence said, making no move to offer her a seat or a drink. "Your mother has already tried. Multiple times. They're going to lose their home," Brooke said, an edge of desperation in her voice. "Grandpa can't be moved to assisted living in his condition. His doctors say the stress is making his recovery impossible." "That's unfortunate," Lawrence replied, unmoved. "But it's not my problem anymore. Your mother, and you, made it clear I was no longer part of the family. Rick is your father figure now. Let him solve it." Brooke's eyes filled with tears. "Rick's broke. The dealership is laying people off. Mom's job might be next. He can't help. So I'm good enough to be the ATM, but not good enough to be treated with basic respect." Lawrence asked coldly. "That's not how it works, Brooke. I was 16 when Mom reconnected with Rick." Brooke burst out. "I was a kid who barely saw her father because he was always working. Rick showed up to my events, took an interest in my life. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to be loyal," Lawrence said simply. "You were supposed to tell me what was happening instead of participating in humiliating me. That Instagram post on my promotion night, that was deliberate cruelty, Brooke, from my own daughter." Brooke looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I know. I'm sorry for that. I was angry because you'd missed my debate championship the week before. for a business dinner. The accusation struck home. Lawrence had indeed missed that event, the regional finals where Brooke's team had placed first. He'd sent flowers and called to congratulate her, but he hadn't been there. "I was building a future for us," he said quietly. "Everything I did was to ensure you and your mother had security and opportunities." "We needed you, not your money," Brooke countered. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because innocent people are suffering. Grandpa and Grandma don't deserve this." Lawrence studied his daughter's face, searching for the manipulation he'd come to expect from Diana. Instead, he saw genuine distress and something else: integrity, the willingness to humble herself for others. "Mom told me your conditions," Brooke continued when he didn't respond. "About writing an acknowledgement about the boat down payment. I'll do it. I'll admit everything. Rick used money from our joint account. Money you gave me for emergencies and college expenses. I knew where it was going, and I didn't stop it." Lawrence hadn't expected this direct admission. "Why now? Why admit it?" "Because it's true," Brooke said simply. "And because Grandpa and Grandma are more important than my pride. Or Mom's. Or Rick's." For the first time in months, Lawrence felt something besides cold satisfaction or burning rage. A glimmer of respect for the young woman his daughter was becoming. Someone willing to admit her mistakes. "Write it," he said, pushing a notepad across the counter that separated them. "Everything. How long you knew about their relationship. When the financial transfers started. How you felt about deceiving me." Brooke took the notepad with shaking hands and began to write. For 20 minutes, the apartment was silent except for the scratch of pen on paper. When she finished, she slid the pages back to Lawrence. The confession was more comprehensive than he'd expected. Brooke admitted knowing about Diana and Rick's relationship for over 2 years before the confrontation. She detailed how Rick had cultivated her loyalty through attention and gifts, gradually turning her against Lawrence. She described the boat down payment scheme and her own willing participation, believing Lawrence owed them for his emotional absence. Most surprisingly, she wrote about her regret, not just for the current circumstances, but for her role in the betrayal itself. "I was wrong," the final paragraph read. "I let resentment and the desire for attention override my integrity. I chose the easier relationship with Rick over the more complicated one with my real father. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for mercy for people who don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes." Lawrence folded the pages carefully and placed them in his desk drawer. "I'll need to think about this." "The foreclosure date is next week," Brooks said, rising to leave. "There's not much time to think." "I'm aware of the timeline," Lawrence replied. "I'll be in touch." After Brooke left, Lawrence poured himself a scotch and read her confession again. The raw honesty surprised him. He had expected the document to be a tool for further leverage, but instead found himself moved by his daughter's willingness to accept responsibility. He picked up his phone and called Martin Wells, despite the late hour. "Martin, it's Lawrence Merrick. I need you to delay the foreclosure proceedings on Frank and Marion Layton's mortgage. Just for 30 days. I'm reconsidering my position." "I'll see what I can do, Mr. Merrick," Martin replied, sounding relieved. The bank would prefer not to foreclose on elderly homeowners if alternatives exist. Lawrence ended the call, uncertain of his next move. The reckoning he had engineered was playing out perfectly, yet Brooks' visit had introduced an unexpected variable. For the first time since the night of his discovery, Lawrence questioned whether his revenge was striking the right targets. Chapter 8: The Ultimatum. The board meeting exceeded all expectations. Meridian's leadership voted unanimously to accelerate the international expansion, with Lawrence receiving formal designation as Chief of Global Operations, a newly created position reporting directly to Ted Blackwell with oversight of all non-domestic ventures. "It comes with a substantial compensation increase," Ted told him afterward, "and a seat on the executive committee. You've earned it, Lawrence." The recognition should have been satisfying, vindication that his professional worth remained untarnished by his personal trials. Instead, Lawrence found himself distracted, Brooks' confession weighing on his mind. The raw vulnerability of her admission had cracked something in his carefully constructed armor of righteous vengeance. After the meeting, Lawrence drove to a part of town he'd avoided for months, the middle-class neighborhood where Diana's parents had lived for over 40 years. The modest ranch-style home looked shabbier than he remembered, the once meticulous landscaping now overgrown. A ramp had been added to the front steps, accommodation for Frank's limited mobility after his strokes. Lawrence sat in his car, observing the house without approaching. What was he doing here? The logical next step in his plan had been to use Brooke's confession as leverage to force a final, humiliating concession from Diana and Rick. Instead, he found himself questioning whether destroying Diana's parents served any purpose beyond cruelty. His phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Brooke told me she came to see you. Whatever you're planning, please leave her out of it. This is between us." Lawrence started the car and drove away without replying. He needed clarity before making his next move. The holiday party that evening would provide a necessary distraction, a chance to accept congratulations from colleagues and bask in his professional success, while he considered his personal vendetta. The party was held at the Marquis, an exclusive hotel downtown whose ballroom Meridian had reserved for the occasion. Lawrence arrived fashionably late, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter as he entered. Colleagues immediately gravitated toward him, offering congratulations on his promotion and inquiring about the European expansion. An hour into the event, Lawrence excused himself from a conversation with board members to get another drink at the bar. As he waited, a familiar voice behind him sent a jolt through his system. "You look good, Lawrence. Success suits you." He turned to find Rick Stanford standing there, incongruously elegant in a well-cut suit that Lawrence suspected was rented for the occasion. Up close, Rick showed signs of strain, new lines around his eyes, a tightness to his smile that hadn't been there in Diana's Instagram photos. "What are you doing here, Stanford?" Lawrence kept his voice low, conscious of colleagues nearby. "Looking for you, actually," Rick replied with forced casualness. "Your assistant was kind enough to mention this event when I called your office." Lawrence made a mental note to have a word with Gina about screening calls more carefully. "You have 30 seconds before I have security escort you out." Rick's facade of confidence wavered. "It's about Frank and Marion's house. The bank called yesterday. They've delayed the foreclosure, but it's still happening. And this concerns me how?" Lawrence asked coolly. "Cut the act, Lawrence. You know exactly what's happening. You engineered it." "No, Rick. You and Diana engineered it when you decided to play house with my family while I paid the bills. Actions have consequences." Rick glanced around the opulent ballroom. The successful executives in designer clothes, the lavish decorations, the general atmosphere of prosperity, and Lawrence saw naked envy in his eyes. "What do you want?" Rick asked finally. "To completely destroy us? Will that satisfy you?" The question gave Lawrence pause. What did he want? The initial rage had cooled, replaced by calculated execution of a revenge plan that now seemed increasingly hollow. "I want you at my apartment tomorrow morning at 9, Lawrence said after a moment. "You, Diana, and Brooke. We'll discuss terms then." "Terms for what?" "For ending this war," Lawrence replied, turning away. "Now get out before someone asks who you are, and I'm forced to explain that you're the man who tried to steal my family." After Rick departed, Lawrence rejoined the party, but his enthusiasm had evaporated. The congratulations and accolades now seemed empty, disconnected from anything that mattered. He made his excuses to Ted Blackwell and left early, returning to his apartment to prepare for the next day's confrontation. Lawrence spent hours drafting and revising a document that would serve as the framework for his ultimatum. By dawn, he had distilled his demands into a concise, legally enforceable agreement that Morton would later formalize. The terms were non-negotiable, designed to provide closure while ensuring accountability. At precisely 9 o'clock, his doorman called to announce that Diana, Rick, and Brooke had arrived. Lawrence instructed him to send them up, then positioned himself behind the kitchen island, copies of his document arranged neatly on the counter. They entered as a unit, a family forged in betrayal, now united in desperation. Diana looked exhausted, the polished appearance she'd always maintained now frayed at the edges. Rick's rented suit from the previous evening had been replaced by jeans and a button-down that had seen better days. Brooke stood slightly apart from them, her expression guarded but determined. "Thank you for coming," Lawrence said formally, as though this were a business meeting rather than a family implosion. "Please sit down." "What is this about, Lawrence?" Diana asked, ignoring his invitation to sit. "Haven't you punished us enough?" "This isn't about punishment anymore," Lawrence replied, surprising even himself with the realization that he meant it. "It's about resolution." He slid copies of a document across the counter. "My terms for ending this situation." Diana picked up the paper, Rick reading over her shoulder. Brooke remained where she was, watching Lawrence's face rather than the document. "You can't be serious," Diana said after scanning the first page. "I'm entirely serious," Lawrence confirmed. "Those are my non-negotiable conditions." The document outlined 3 main requirements. First, Rick would assume full financial responsibility for Diana's parents' mortgage through a legal refinancing, with Lawrence providing a one-time payment to reduce the principal by half. This would make the monthly payments manageable on Rick's salary, but would still require significant sacrifice on his part. Second, Diana would relinquish all claims to Brooke's college fund, which Lawrence would maintain independently, with payments made directly to Wellerton University rather than to Brooke herself. Additionally, Diana would provide a notarized statement acknowledging that she had concealed her relationship with Rick for 3 years while continuing to accept financial support from Lawrence. Third, and most controversially, Brooke would spend 1 weekend each month with Lawrence for the next year, participating in a structured reconnection program developed by a family therapist of Lawrence's choosing. If these meetings went well, Lawrence would establish a trust fund for Brooke's future graduate education or first home purchase, accessible when she turned 25. "This is extortion," Rick protested. "You're using Diana's parents as leverage to force these conditions." "No," Lawrence corrected him. "I'm offering a solution to a problem you created. I have no legal obligation to help Diana's parents keep their home. This is a gesture of goodwill, with conditions. And if we refuse," Diana challenged, "then we continue as we have been," Lawrence said simply. "The foreclosure proceeds, and you find your own solution. My legal obligations to you ended with our divorce settlement." Diana turned to Brooke. "Did you know about this? Is this why you wanted your written confession?" "No," Brooke replied, meeting Lawrence's gaze. "I had no idea." Lawrence addressed his daughter directly. "The weekend meetings are optional, Brooke. I won't force you to spend time with me if you genuinely don't want to. But I'm offering a chance to rebuild something that might benefit us both. And my grandparents' house depends on my agreement?" Brooke asked, her voice tight. "No," Lawrence said firmly. "That part is between Rick, your mother, and me. You're not a bargaining chip." Something shifted in Brooke's expression, surprise, then cautious relief. "Then I'll agree to the meetings. Not for the trust fund, but because I think we should try." Diana looked betrayed. "Brooke, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do, Mom," Brooke replied quietly. "Not because Dad's forcing me, but because it's right." "We hurt him. Badly. And pretending otherwise doesn't make it untrue." Rick stood silent, his expression unreadable as he reread the document. Finally, he looked up at Lawrence. "You want me to struggle making these payments? To feel the burden every month?" "Yes," Lawrence acknowledged without pretense. "I want you to feel the weight of responsibility you so eagerly took on when you decided my family was yours for the taking." "I can live with that," Rick said unexpectedly. "At least it's honest." Unlike the past 3 years. Diana looked between the two men, disbelief evident on her face. "You're actually considering this, Rick? What choice do we have, Diana?" Rick asked tiredly. "Your parents lose their home otherwise." And frankly, Lawrence could have demanded much worse. Lawrence had expected more resistance, perhaps even outright refusal. The relative ease of their capitulation suggested just how precarious their situation had become, and how reasonable his terms actually were, given the circumstances. "If we agree to this," Diana said finally, "will it be the end? No more financial manipulation, no more using your resources to control our lives." "Yes," Lawrence promised. "Once the documents are signed and the refinancing complete, we'll have no financial connections beyond Brooke's education. You'll be free to live your lives without my interference." And what about your part in all this? Diana pressed. Do you acknowledge any responsibility for the breakdown of our marriage? Your absence, your prioritization of work over family. Lawrence considered this. Throughout his campaign of retribution, he had focused solely on their betrayal, not on its potential causes. Had he contributed to the circumstances that led Diana to seek comfort elsewhere? Almost certainly. Did that justify the deception? Absolutely not. I wasn't a perfect husband, he conceded, or father. I worked long hours and missed important moments. But nothing justifies 3 years of lies, Diana. Nothing justifies turning my daughter against me while taking my financial support. Diana looked away, the truth of his words apparently hitting home. When do you need our answer? Take 24 hours, Lawrence said. Discuss it. Consult a lawyer if you wish. But remember, the foreclosure clock is ticking. They left with copies of his proposal, Rick and Diana subdued, Brooke lingering briefly to make eye contact with Lawrence, a small gesture that conveyed more than words could. After they departed, Lawrence called Morton to brief him on the meeting and have formal documents prepared. Then he sat alone in his apartment. The view of the city spread before him, wondering why his perfect revenge now felt like a hollow victory. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. 6 months later, Lawrence stood on the deck of his Lake Tahoe property, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and the promise of approaching summer. Inside, Gina was arranging documents for his review, quarterly reports from Meridian's global operations, which Lawrence now oversaw from a comfortable distance. Ted Blackwell had formally announced his retirement a month prior, naming Lawrence as his successor effective January 1st. At 44, Lawrence would become one of the youngest CEOs in the industry, his meteoric rise fueled partly by talent and partly by the single-minded focus he'd maintained during his personal crisis. A car approached on the private road leading to the house, a modest Honda Civic that Lawrence recognized immediately. He remained on the deck, watching as Brooke parked and emerged, carrying a small overnight bag. This would be their 6th weekend meeting since the agreement had been formalized. The first few had been awkward, stilted affairs filled with carefully neutral conversations and long silences. But gradually, under the guidance of Dr. Weston, the family therapist Lawrence had engaged, they had begun to rebuild something resembling a relationship. "Hey," Brooke said, climbing the steps to the deck. At 18, she carried herself with more confidence than Lawrence remembered, her posture no longer defensive in his presence. "Good drive?" he asked, accepting her brief hug. Traffic was light. "Mom says hello." The mention of Diana no longer triggered Lawrence's anger. The formal statement she had provided, acknowledging her deception and relinquishing claims to Brooke's education fund, had provided a kind of closure that no amount of financial revenge could have achieved. "How's your first semester going?" Lawrence asked as they moved inside. Brooke had started at Wellerton University 3 months earlier, her deferred admission reinstated once Lawrence resumed financial support. "Challenging but good," she replied. "My economics professor suggested I consider adding finance as a second major." Lawrence felt a flicker of pride. "You've always had a head for numbers." "Wonder where I got that from," Brooke said with a small smile. Gina looked up from her organization of documents. "Everything's ready for your review, Mr. Merrick. The Tokyo numbers look especially promising." "Thank you, Gina. That's all for today. Enjoy your weekend." After his assistant departed, Lawrence gave Brooke a tour of the recently renovated property. He had purchased the neighboring lot, doubling the lakefront footage and adding a guest house where Brooke would stay during her visits. "It's really beautiful," she commented, looking out at the lake from her temporary quarters. "I haven't been here since I was 14. "I remember," Lawrence said. "You spent the entire week on the dock with your sketchbook." Brooke looked surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember more than you think," Lawrence replied, "including the drawing you did of the old boathouse that used to be down there. I still have it somewhere." The conversation over dinner flowed more naturally than during previous visits. Brooke described her classes, her new roommate, the campus activities she'd joined. Lawrence shared updates on his work, carefully edited to avoid the impression of prioritizing business over their time together. Have you heard from Rick lately? Lawrence asked as they moved to the living room with coffee. The question would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, but therapy had helped Lawrence separate his feelings about Rick's actions from his concern for Brooke's well-being. Brooke hesitated. He's struggling. The boat dealership closed last month. Economy's hitting luxury purchases hard. He's working at the Toyota place across town now, less commission. And the mortgage payments? He's managing, Brooke said. Barely. Mom's promotion at the insurance office helps. They're not living large, but the bills get paid. Lawrence nodded, satisfied. Not because Rick was struggling, though the petty part of him still took some satisfaction in that, but because he was honoring his commitments despite the difficulty. It spoke to a character that Lawrence had previously refused to acknowledge might exist. And your grandparents? Grandpa's doing better since the stress of possibly losing the house lifted. Grandma says he's even talking about planting a garden next spring. The conversation lulled into comfortable silence. Brooke sipped her coffee, then set it down decisively. Can I ask you something, Dad? Something we haven't really talked about in therapy? Lawrence tensed slightly, but nodded. Of course. Are you happy? I mean, you got everything you wanted. The promotion, the house, your revenge. Did it fix anything? The question cut to the heart of what Lawrence had been contemplating during solitary evenings in this very room. Had his meticulous revenge plan brought him happiness? Had it healed the wound of betrayal? Not in the way I expected, he admitted. The anger kept me functioning when I might have collapsed. The revenge gave me purpose when I felt adrift. But happiness? No, that's come more recently, and from unexpected sources. Like what? Like these weekends, Lawrence said honestly. Getting to know my daughter as the adult she's becoming, rather than the child I remember. Finding meaning in building something rather than tearing it down. Brooke studied him, her expression thoughtful. You know, for a long time I was angry that you seemed to care more about your work than about us. I used that to justify everything. The lies, letting Rick step into your role, even that Instagram post that hurt you so much. Lawrence waited, sensing she needed to continue. But I've realized something over these past months. You never stopped caring. You just didn't know how to show it except through providing for us. And we, especially Mom and I, never acknowledged how much that mattered. The admission struck Lawrence deeply. For years, he had measured his worth as husband and father through financial provision, professional achievement, creating security. The emotional connection had seemed secondary, a luxury compared to the essentials of keeping his family safe and comfortable. I made mistakes too, Lawrence acknowledged. I should have been more present, more attuned to what was happening in my own home. Maybe we all got what we deserved, Brooke suggested. Mom and Rick have each other, but they'll struggle financially for years. You got your career success and financial security, but lost your family. And she paused. I learned that loyalty matters, that actions have consequences. And what about now? Lawrence asked. What do we deserve now? Brooke considered this. Maybe a second chance? Not to go back to what was, that's impossible, but to build something new that acknowledges the past without being defined by it. Lawrence thought about the trust fund he had established for Brooke, set to mature when she turned 25. The legal document had been drafted as a contingency, a carrot to ensure her participation in these mandated visits. Now it seemed unnecessary. Their reconnection was happening organically, driven by mutual effort rather than financial incentive. "I'd like that," he said simply. The weekend unfolded differently than their previous meetings. They hiked along the lakeshore, Lawrence pointing out properties he'd considered purchasing before settling on this one. Brooke showed him sketches from her art elective, talent Lawrence had never properly appreciated before. They talked about her future plans, his upcoming CEO position, possibilities neither had considered during the dark months of their estrangement. On Sunday afternoon, as Brooke prepared to return to campus, Lawrence handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked, pausing in the act of loading her overnight bag into the car. "The trust document," Lawrence explained. "I've had it amended. It's now an irrevocable trust, no longer contingent on our meetings. Whether you choose to continue these weekends or not, the fund will be there when you turn 25. Brooke looked down at the envelope, then back at Lawrence. "I'm going to keep coming, you know. Not for this. I know, Lawrence said, but I wanted you to be sure that you're here by choice, not obligation. After Brooke departed, Lawrence returned to the deck, watching until her car disappeared around the bend in the road. His phone buzzed with an email notification. Ted Blackwell, sending the final transition timeline for Lawrence's CEO ascension. Lawrence glanced at it briefly, then set the phone aside. There would be time for work later. For now, he wanted to sit with the unexpected peace he had found, not in the completion of his revenge, but in its transformation into something more constructive. Diana and Rick would continue their struggles, both financial and otherwise. The consequences of their actions would follow them for years, perhaps decades. Lawrence's targeted revenge had ensured that, but he no longer needed to actively participate in their difficulties to feel vindicated. His own wounds hadn't disappeared entirely. Trust, once broken, could never be fully restored. But the bitter rage that had consumed him for months had mellowed into something more manageable, a scar rather than an open wound. Lawrence Merrick had gotten his revenge. It hadn't played out exactly as he'd planned, with the total destruction of those who had betrayed him. Instead, it had evolved into something more nuanced. Accountability without obliteration, consequences balanced with selective mercy. In the end, Lawrence reflected, true power wasn't found in destroying others, but in deciding when to stop. He had brought Diana, Rick, and Brooke to their knees, and then, from that position of absolute leverage, had chosen a path that allowed for something beyond mere vengeance. Not forgiveness. Lawrence Merrick wasn't capable of that. Not yet, and perhaps not ever. But something adjacent to it. Something that acknowledged the reality that human connections, even damaged ones, were more complex than the balance sheet of emotional debts he had so carefully tabulated. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the lake, Lawrence pulled out his phone again and opened Ted's email. Tomorrow he would return to the city, to Meridian's headquarters, to the life he had built from the ashes of personal betrayal. He would continue to excel, to lead, to achieve. But he would do so now with a different understanding of success, one that couldn't be measured solely in stock options or corporate titles or financial retribution. One that included weekend conversations with his daughter and the gradual rebuilding of a relationship he had once thought irretrievably lost. It wasn't the ending he had originally planned in those dark days after discovering Diana's betrayal. It was perhaps something better. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.